CTI and related to that. Uh, I had labs planned in the evening, but we'll see how we can circumvent around that. We'll figure something out, etc. But majorly today, I want to cover a very important aspect about CTI itself, which are the models itself. We spoke about brief issues in identifying cyber threat intelligence versus threat feeds. We also discussed problems around the entire aspect of owning them and looking at what we're trying to analyze, etc. And we also spoke about very briefly in terms of the frameworks that are available with us, which we had to basically use in our labs, etc. to do. But not a problem, we'll figure something out for that. Moving on today, what we're going to be doing is the frameworks that decide or are used for CTI majorly across the world, and why we actually use them. What are the benefits of those frameworks? We'll further go and analyze problems that we see with these frameworks, how we can circumvent those problems, how do we come to a common language that we talk about. Thereafter, we will also be looking at certain problems within these frameworks itself and why each framework is not perfect, but it actually needs to be tailored to your situation that you're actually looking at. Further, we will also be looking at from a lab perspective, we'll see how we can figure that out, but I wanted to cover out basically how we can automate reports which we can map to frameworks using a tool. We also wanted to interact with the sticks and taxi framework, which we spoke about last time. And we also discussed a solution called MISP. So these are the four things I wanted to cover, but we'll see how we can, rock around that. So I just share my screen. Okay, before we get into it, do you have any questions at all from a perspective last time, etc., that we discussed? Anything, any questions, anything that you want to probably just discuss again, etc.?
So the books which are given, right? So they give a kind of a very high level framework that unless we really know and see and feel, right? I think those books are not really giving any big picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So ideally, all threat intelligence that you look at is going to give you a very high level picture. The idea is that we're going to drill down into it today. Uh, See, at the end of the day, threat intelligence is to aid, right? There is no hard and fast rule that tomorrow, even if you bring something to me, we will have to discuss and see what works, right? There is no hard and fast rule that I can define for you or any book can define for you what is best and this is how you have to go and this is what you can use, right? It has to be very tailor made to what your situation is, what you like to follow, what you think is good in your organization, etc. as well. So remember, this is an aiding aspect. So nobody will tell you that these are, I mean, this is a principle and this is how you need to follow it and this is how you need to do it. You just have to see what fits in your org and what you are comfortable using, right? We will discuss some of the problems, etc. as well, and we will try to iron out what we can use when and how. But it'll still give that little, question mark at the end of the day that as an analyst, you are free to choose what you want.
Yeah, correct.
Any other questions, etc. anybody has? Okay, all right. So getting into frameworks and why do we require these frameworks, why were they built, etc., is something that we'll discuss. So moving on, uh, we do know there is a lot of CTI information available with us, right? If you keep digging in, you will find multiple sources, you will find multiple reports. You are overwhelmed with feeds, you're overwhelmed with multiple sites giving you data. So the the idea here is that as an analyst, you end up getting so much data. How do we start organizing it, right? How do we start using it? What all can I actually process? And with this, you get another question that as an analyst, how much can you actually retain in your working memory? And Miller basically defined a law for that and said that an average person can actually hold approximately 7 objects in his memory. That means if you're circling across multiple reports and feeds, etc., at a given point of time, you will only remember certain aspects of it, whether it's the IP address, whether it's their tactics, whether it's their phases. We'll be talking about all of these in details, but there are certain aspects that you can work with, and there are certain aspects that you will get overwhelmed by information whenever you are attending to the CTI information that you're getting. So, why do we use these frameworks? Is whenever we are getting this information, we start organizing it. And when we start organizing this information, how it helps us is there are certain set standards that are set for everybody in the world who is talking about CTI, right? I'm sure everybody has gone through some threat reports, etc. It talks about kill chains, it talks about attack frameworks, it talks about Lockheed Martin, it talks about different kind of methodologies that people use. Uh, FireEye having its own, but every aspect of this kill chain is just two things that they basically help us do. Is number one, they help us take all this information and put it in a more structured manner so that we don't need to keep it in our working memory. And number two, it helps us define a common language for speaking across the world. Whoever does CTI, whoever is basically looking at this data, is actually looking at it in a specific way and is talking the same language. Tomorrow, if you're doing CTI in your own organization and somebody else is doing it in their own way, and you actually need to correlate that data, or you need to share that data, and if everybody is doing it in their own custom way and not following, say, some set standards, then it starts getting very difficult for people to actually process and to understand what the other person is trying to say. Hence, we have frameworks. uh, these frameworks basically also help us against concepts of bias, which I will discuss in detail. And why do we say that there's a certain concept of bias which comes is because CTI is heavily human dependent. It talks about humans, it is analyzed by humans, we interpret it, and then we basically send it out. So by and large, every person that goes through a CTI report is bound to have certain amount of biases against country, adversary, IPs, stuff like that. We'll discuss it. There are multiple details in this, but we'll go through each one more and more in detail and how to circumvent these biases as well. The second thing that it helps us also is with gaps that we can find. So there are multiple aspects that you pick up in terms of details from multiple sources, etc., that you'll get. How do we start picking up these details and actually filling in the correct information that we require to take a call or to understand what any threat actor is actually trying to do? The third aspect is comparing previous incidents for any adversary that we have. And by an adversary, what I mean is any attacker, right? So people generally have built their attacks, they have their own signatures, they have very set structures that they want to follow. Why do people change their attack methodologies? Is because they get detected. Once they get detected, uh, all they do is they manipulate a certain number of things from a technical perspective so that they can circumvent certain tools that you've set up to detect them. And secondly, they circumvent known CTI information so that people who are analyzing it and who are basically following CTI by the book don't start detecting them again. But everybody has their own signature and own MO defined, and they basically can very easily be compared using frameworks that we have. And the last part, within these frameworks that we use for certain actors, we can very easily again start looking for patterns on in terms of how they're trying to attack us, what is the most common approach that people are using today, and what is actually the trend going on in terms of, is there a vulnerability which has come up which people are exploiting to use, is there a certain methodology that people are exploiting to use, right? Thereby you can focus your entire knowledge in terms of patching those things or finding a fix for that. So issues are going to keep coming up, right? People are going to keep finding new and new ways to come up with circumventing those issues that you have or exploiting them. People are going to keep finding ways to bypass your security solutions as well. The only thing that helps us is community driven intelligence that we keep feeding in. And the good part is that a lot, or say almost 60 to 70% of the security teams that are working across the world are very open to sharing information in terms of attacks, in terms of incidents, in terms of adversary information. And that is why CTI has become a very critical aspect, because somebody who gets attacked, at least the agenda is that we protect the other people who are there, right? So this is more like, so CTI completely is a community driven initiative. People have to start feeding data into it in order for it to be successful. Until date, it works. Any questions here before I deep dive into the frameworks?
So most of it is driven within US, right? And we take a feed from US only.
Not necessarily. I would say in US, it's driven. You'd be surprised to know India is also contributing to a heavy amount of CTI. Uh, all the major firms that basically work in the US, they have their analysts working out of India. The data that is actually getting picked up is picked up worldwide. So it's not only US. You might be subscribing to companies or people who have actually, started benefiting or selling CTI is US based companies for sure. They were in this space a long time before anybody started realizing it. But again, remember, they are still tapping the same sources which we as security engineers can tap in as well. Uh, Dashboarding it, cleaning it out, giving it to you in a nice report is something that they're doing. But
Okay.
CTI is very, very heavily dependent from Israel, from Russia, from China, from India. Uh, I don't know if you've read the recent trends in terms of reports, and India is also started to become a originator of attacks as well as a target in the top four in terms of being attacked as well. So earlier we used to only find India being targeted. Uh, a lot of the attacks which have come up in the recent past are also getting springed up from India now.
Okay. The people, the governing body at last will be
Hmm.
all still. Who are the governing bodies for this feed?
So nobody is the governing body of it, right? So again, when we say that intelligence is open sourced, right? There are bound to be issues in terms of the data being there or being prevalent. Yes, there are certain bodies who work towards making a structure out of it or understanding it or validating that data. But if you're asking me that is there somebody, like a certain board or some group of people who are actually, owning all these things, no, there's not. Everybody does this, gets their information, posts it, uh, shares this information, people make sense out of it and publish it. And that is what the community driven feed is all about.
So the point is there need to be some server, right, where this will be all this data need to be uploaded,
Yep. There,
cleaned.
yeah, there.
So if there are servers, somebody will be owning that server. Like Apache, let's say Apache is a open
Absolutely.
source,
So there
but
are some.
Apache board is controlling all the servers. They collect the money. They do the whole management.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right there. And yes, there are certain boards, if you want to say term them like that, but yes, there are certain groups who manage this data. For example, Mitre as a company basically does this for us. They host a certain amount of framework and certain amount of data for us as well. Most of the data that is actually held in terms of community driven feeds is on forums which are free, right? We need to tap into those forums. So like GitHub has a lot of CTI data, like people, Pastebin has a lot of CTI data. Forums which basically discuss attacker methodologies has a lot of CTI data. dark web has a lot of CTI data, right? So if you see that there is one where the raw data is actually lying, it's lying in multiple places. If you're asking me if people are actually structuring it and validating it and publishing it, yes, there are some organizations who work towards that and are giving you that information, and they've also standardized the way of publishing this information as well. But again, it is up to you whether you want to process raw data or you want to process data which somebody has analyzed. So the only problem here is that if you process raw data, you need to source data out, you need to make sense of it, you need to tie it up, you need to use one of the frameworks to basically map that data and then make sense of it. If you use something which somebody has already analyzed and validated, then that amount of work for you is done. And if we look at organizations today, I know very few organizations who have dedicated CTI teams working for it. How CTI is being consumed is either in one of the devices people have integrated it, or there is just a standard framework that people are using and mapping reports to it. These are the two maximum things that I have seen people using CTI in their organizations. I would just probably name only one or two companies, or I mean, who have CTI teams, but I mean, leaving aside cybersecurity companies, but very few of them are actually doing it in the way that it's intended to be done.
It's a difficult space, right? If it's a unstructured data, because if you look at it, it may be different type of feeds coming. If you look at like there may be snort feeds which are coming. There's suricata feeds. These are like some regex type of thing, and then there may be some other feeds, maybe from IBM. It may be something may be coming, and then we may be something having some. So it's like for a company to get all the feed and make sense out of it is very difficult.
I would swing it both ways. Yes, it is difficult. I won't say that it's fairly easy to do, right? But the amount of information that you can get is very valuable. See, the only problem with the security industry today is for everybody, right? I'm sure that whoever's in the industry, even for me, is to prove an ROI, right? You cannot do it until and unless something goes wrong. And similarly, with CTI, it is even more difficult to do because you will spend X amount of dollars, you will spend X amount of hours with very little intelligence, which is actually helping you out. That's why mostly everybody who uses CTI generally just says, okay, I will just subscribe to say fees, or I will just ask my vendor to do this for me because I don't have the time or the way, or say the technical capabilities to do it, right? That is why it is becoming an important space as well. But remember, whenever any of your say vendors is providing you CTI information, there is some analyst working at their end to give you that information, and with every analyst that raw information passes through, it loses out some amount of its information. So yes, difficult to do. Yes, very like minuscule results that you will get. But when you get these results, it helps you actually prevent attacks to a very good level. And I will give you an example of this probably in some time.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So if you look at some of the companies like let's say FireEye,
Yeah.
they may have like 25,000, I don't know, maybe 30,000, 40,000 customers.
Mhm.
They are doing it at one place. It makes sense for them, right? They can put the
Absolutely,
workforce.
absolutely makes sense for it. But I will also discuss issues in these kind of approaches as well. So yes, that is a way out. Uh, yes, big companies can pay FireEye for threat intelligence. Uh, what about the people like SMEs, medium-sized enterprises who don't have that kind of money to pay to FireEye, right? What about people who want clear-cut reports in terms of their industry or their organization? So there is a lot which basically changes here, and there are a lot of things which FireEye does very well. There are a lot of things which FireEye doesn't do also. But again, if you can benefit from it, and if that raw information is there for everybody to consume, why not do it?
Okay, just maybe last question. I'm asked interrupting a lot.
No, no,
Just
no.
let's say we have different endpoints,
Mhm.
and we still need to drop some kind of agent to get the feed, right? Live feed from my network, my devices, and then I feed it in and match it with the intelligence which I have. So these agents which are these are also available freely in the open source where I can basically get these captures.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we don't require any agents on machines. The only source of information for CTI again is raw statistical information. So it depends on what type of information you want to capture, right? If you want to capture raw CTI, it's free. All you need is a Python script and a server, right? Or any other scripting language. You just need to hit the source, you can get the information, you need to put it into a framework, and that information is available with you. If you're talking about matching this CTI information with the logs that you're actually getting, it can be done at your SIEM again in an open source way. Doesn't require any agents, etc., to be there. So all we need to do is map every line of log that is actually coming to a incident or adversary, or find patterns and trends for it. And most of the SIEMs today are already doing this. And there are some open source ones like the I don't know, I think most of you must have worked on the elk stack as well, the elastic log stash Kibana, and elastic has started giving CTI information out of the box now.
Okay.
So yes, there are paid ways to do it. Yes, you don't, okay, no, definitely you don't need to install agents. It can be done on the central SIEMs as well. In case you don't have central SIEMs, then we can also do it from a very basic Python script as well.
Okay. So relying totally on the logs. Okay.
Yep. It's your logs vis-a-vis information that we've captured. And then I know friends in the BFSI industry who say that, okay, I cannot uh, share logs, I cannot give out information. So the best part is that you can do this offline as well. I mean, if you update your feed say once a week, once a month as well, that's still okay in terms of understanding it, and you can do it offline as well. So people who are worried about data sharing, uh, although I'm not very fond of this in the open source industry where you say, okay, I want to consume data, but I don't want to give out data. But yes, there are ways to do it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Moving on. There are four major CTI frameworks that anywhere you go in the world, any vendor you go to, anybody you talk to, you will end up talking about either of these four CTI frameworks that people leverage their analysis based on. Majorly, most of you, I think, must have heard about attack frameworks. There is also another framework which FireEye basically is devised its own. FireEye calls it their own FireEye kill chain itself, which they've added a few steps to the Lockheed Martin one. But wherever you go, at the end of the day, CTI information can be classified using any of these four frameworks that we talk about. Okay. Again, if you ask me, is one better than the other? Is Attack the best? Is Lockheed Martin the best? Is FireEye the best? I don't have an answer to that. It will depend on what you demand, what your requirements are, how you want to process CTI information. So again, depends completely on you. Yes, there are drawbacks of each and every framework that we talk about over here. There are certain advantages also. So it depends on how you want to process information or what kind of information you require in your organizations, and then you can leverage one of the four CTI frameworks that you have. Why do we require these frameworks? Again, I'm just reiterating this. Whenever you download any threat intel report or you hit information in terms of getting any intelligence, they will be customized in either of these four outputs that you get. For example, if you download a file from say anywhere else and you have say it's a PDF file, you can open it, right? You can understand it. Similarly, if you download any threat intelligence file and you parse it in any of these four frameworks, you will be able to understand them because they will be talking about either one of these frameworks. If we did not have these frameworks, just think that we will not have a common way to discuss it. That means I can write my CTI in whatever I want to write it, and you can write it in whatever the way you want to write it in. Remember, because there is no one or zero in here, which is right or wrong, right? Uh, how I interpret it is completely up to me. How you interpret it is completely up to you. So just to standardize approaches across the framework, across the market, across the industry, we have certain models which help us to do that. Starting with the first one, uh, I just spoke about this as well, but just remember that all models are somewhat wrong, but are also useful. So just remember that there are limitations to each and every model that we discuss, and we will talk about the limitations as well. Starting with the diamond model, right? Uh, the diamond model was or is still used across industries where we have very basic kind of requirements for cyber threat intelligence. If you as an organization are looking at just four questions to ask in terms of who the adversary is, what their capabilities are, what kind of infrastructure do they have, and who is the victim, where adversary is your attacker or an attack group, right? Capabilities are the way that they will actually infiltrate into your network or launch an attack into your network or on you. Infrastructure is where will they be hosted? What kind of infra do they have at the back end? Are they operating from a single region? Are they operating from multiple regions? Stuff like that. And who is their target? If these are the four questions that you ask and you need information about, and you think this information is more than enough for you in terms of understanding cyber threat intelligence, the diamond model is for you, and it is the right approach to take in terms of a very basic CTI model if you want to go ahead with it. The only issue here is that at the end of the day, it is extremely high level. You do not go into the in-depth of data in terms to understand what the adversary is doing, what exact capabilities do they have, what exact infrastructure do they have, uh, what kind of victims are they targeting. You are still looking at this from a zero lens, very, very high level, with very basic information. But if you think this kind of information is helpful towards you and is actually something that you demand in your organization, it is a good way to go about it. The second problem here is that because this is again human driven, right? Again, because people will be working on this individually, people will be collecting information from reports and mapping it to these frameworks or to say one of the models that you're talking about. It depends on what information from a report will you as an analyst add in the adversary field, add in the capability field, add in the infra field, and add in the victim field. And why this is a problem is because if you get this information at a high level, you are okay. If you get this information at a very low level, what information will you actually add in each of the four places gets a little hard to do. Because remember, as a person or as an organization, you to come and told me that, okay, I don't want to know the nitty gritties of CTI. All I want to know is who's the attacker, what are they capable of, where is their infrastructure hosted, and who is the victim. Am I one of them? Is my industry one of them? That's the only question you're asking. Any questions on this?
Yeah, looks okay.
Perfect.
So this report will be generated by
by
Somebody from
by anybody in the industry, by multiple threat intelligence feeds as well. If somebody, so for example, if format says diamond model, then you can be assured that these are the four things that you will get.
okay.
There is still an aspect that uh, we still discuss here, which is basically adversary based analysis, capability based analysis, victim based analysis, and infrastructure based analysis. What that means is that when you have, say, the attacker information or the adversary information that you have, right, and your whole analysis is based on the attack vectors of, say, a group specifically, right? In that scenario, we call it adversary based analysis. In this, what you would do is you would try to find out as much information about the attacker in itself. What does the attacker do? What have they done in the past? What are the methodologies that they've used? And you map it. If you're doing a capability based analysis, what you would do is you would find the ways people have attacked, say, in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, or you look at all the attack groups that exist and you map out capabilities of that attack group or of a specific industry or a specific organization. When you talk about infrastructure based analysis, it's just in terms of where are they hosted, what kind of IPs are they using, what kind of domains are they using, generally in a trend, how recently are they registered, blah blah blah. In terms of victim based analysis, you focus only on the targets that certain adversaries are actually making. For example, it is the, say, the BFSI industry. For example, it is e-com. For example, they're targeting government, right? So you only specify your entire way of demonstrating this information in terms of the victim. Then if you want to use this as a generic model, you can also use it. But if you want to use it as one of the specific models that you get, you can use them in individual capacities as well. Any questions on this?
Yeah, looks good. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. I will be giving you examples of this and we will be doing a class exercise in some time. So just hang on. I will show you live ways of looking at information for diamond model as well. But just to understand all the models there, moving on to the next one is around the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, and pretty standard stuff. This was developed by Lockheed Martin, and what it does is it focuses on phases. And what we mean about phases is that every attack that we look at, right, it can be divided into 7 phases according to Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. But the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain focuses heavily on the adversary. Okay. It will never focus on the capability. It will not focus on the victim. It will not focus on the infrastructure. It will focus on the adversary information that you're getting. So any details that you pick up from the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain will talk about the attack group and will talk about what this attack group does in either of these 7 phases that we have. For example, if I'm an attack group, what do I do in recon? What do I do in weaponization? What do I do in delivery? What do I do in exploitation? What do I do in installation? What do I do in C2C? And what do I do in terms of once I have control? So if you want to talk a standard language in terms of Lockheed Martin, uh, and you want to understand in depth about the adversary, about how they want to propagate their attack in any of the 7 phases, then you can pick up the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain information and that'll be enough for you. But you do not get information in terms of their capabilities here. You do not get information in terms of the infra here, and you do not get information in terms of who their victims are. If these are additional three things that you require, then this is not the right framework to use. Any questions here? Okay. Also, one more thing that we do in the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain is what action do we want to take in terms of any of the seven things that or the seven phases that we have. So in recon, what action do we want to take? Do we only want to detect? Do we want to deny? Do we want to disrupt, degrade, deceive, or destroy? Right? So every step that you see in terms of the seven figures that you see over here, or the seven phases that you see over here, we have to decide some kind of action that we're going to be taking. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for us to apply this. For example, if somebody is performing recon, what is the type of action that you will take? If somebody is weaponizing, what is the type of action you will take? You need to define that in the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, and this is the output that it actually gives you. We will also go through some sample reports, and if you go through them, it will talk about how somebody is doing weaponization, for example, and what is the best course of action you can take in terms of curtailing that attack. The third one that we look at, or other life cycle ones that we look at, is Mitre also had its own cyber attack life cycle that they define, and FireEye obviously has its own as well. Uh, they're just modifications over the standard kill chain that we talk about, but they basically just have a few steps which are here and there, and that's about it. At the end of the day, they still define the same amount of information the same way that the information is presented. Terminologies in FireEye is slightly different compared to the static kill chain that we have, but mostly it defines the same kind of information that you have. The most used framework in CTI at the moment is the attack framework. It is something that your vendors are also using in today's day and age. It is something that most cyber analysts are using in today's day and age. And why is that so? Is because uh, you have a lot of in-depth information that you get uh, right from the baseline itself. So basically, you get a lot of information to right down to the bin level. So in a lot of detail, and you focus on the attackers' tactics that they have. We don't have phases anymore. We don't have who's the attacker, what are they doing, what is the IP address, blah, blah, blah. We don't do all of that. What we focus on is what are the tactics of the attacker that is actually there. So how do they do initial access? What is the execution? What is the persistence? What is the defense evasion techniques? What are the credential access? What are discovery, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration, CNC, right? Now, the basic of this does not change at the end of the day. It remains the same. Every attack or every tactic that a person will actually do will be part of one of these things that you're talking about. If we roll this back to the Lockheed Martin kill chain, you are talking about phases over here. Recon phase, weaponization phase, delivery phase, right? In attack, we talk about the tactics that an attacker is going to use. You do not see IP address anymore. You do not see the victim anymore. You do not see adversary anymore. You do not see infrastructure anymore. All you are seeing over here are TTPs, and the entire attack framework works irrespective of who the group is, but it will provide you information to a very low level. Any questions here?
It looks good.
All right. Again, when I said why is attack useful is because it's providing us a lot of low level information, and you have a common way to talk about very detailed stuff across the board, across the world. You have a static framework to do that. So just imagine when you're using high level frameworks, there is a lot of interpretation that you're doing, and the way you're writing a report actually matters. When you're using low level frameworks, this information at the end of the day everybody has and will cannot change it too much. For example, if I write in recon so and so IPs or etc was seen, right? Now it actually depends on you how you want to write it down. But when I'm using the attack framework, I'm actually mapping it in terms of a tactic. For example, if defense evasion was used, for example, if somebody did port scanning, right? That port scanning word cannot change uh, no matter where am I in the world. The problem with this framework is that it is still limited in the type of CTI it actually represents. And why? Because we are missing out the adversary, victim, infra. Uh, all that information is being missed out here. So if you're a team and you say that I require details like IP, or I require details like geolocation, or I require details like who the victims are, like which industries are being targeted, etc., attack framework is not for you. This framework is very good for operation teams who basically are mapping this into their SIEMs to figure out if a line of log actually matches any tactic that is available. Let me give you an example. For example, if you had an SIEM, right, and there were logs that you were capturing, and for example, you see a port scan. Next, you see somebody trying to install another file or weaponize that, right? Next, you see defensive agent techniques. Next, you see people are trying to make connections, etc. Right? If we look at all these 14 phases that we have, you will be able to map out very clearly from the static logs that you have in terms of attack what somebody is trying to do. Once you do that, we can map it back to any of the adversaries that we have to understand that these are the generic tactics that this adversary group follows. But how do those tactics actually work? What are the kind of markets or industries that they're actually attacking? What is the kind of infrastructure that they hosted from? I will not know all this information here. So as a generic team for cybersecurity, it doesn't make sense for you to go down to this level of information. If you're operations and if you're dealing with defense, if you're a blue team, it definitely makes sense to do this and get this information out. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. Now, the good part is you have a lot of information available about different kind of attack groups that exist, and using that we basically can map a lot of information in uh, the entire attack framework that we see, right? How do we get this information? How do we map it? Is the information is consistent or constant that you get in terms of, say, a report or open source intelligence? Let's, for simplicity's sake, take that there was a report on APT 28 which came up. From that, we scanned the entire report and we mapped out what that report is actually talking about. So how did it get initial access? How did it get execution? How did it get persistence and all of that, right? Once we map this information out, now if you have information that all these things that you're seeing over here is performed by, say, an APT 28, right? And you map this into your SIEMs. And if you see these lights coming on in your SIEM saying that, okay, in initial access, execution, persistence, and privilege escalation, from logs, I'm seeing XYZ and these lights coming on, then you can very well know that you're under an attack for APT 28. From a static SIEM, you will never be able to correlate the kind of attack group or the adversary which is trying to attack you. The good part about this as well is for each stage, we know how we need to mitigate. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Similarly, this is an APT 29 techniques that have been mapped, very similar to what you're seeing, but slightly different than what APT 28 does. What you can also do is compare the common techniques in terms of what, say, one like APT 28 and 29 does. Uh, you can figure out the differences, you can figure out what is similar, what is not similar, and you can actually map out that entire information here. And coming to the last framework that we talk about is Veris. And Veris is generally, again, a very high level framework that we use, but it talks about most of the important information that you would have read in your current reporting schemes or questions that people would have asked you. In terms of Veris, it captures four information. The first being around the actors. So whose actions actually affected an asset which I spoke to you about. So uh, who were the threat actors in the first place, right? What kind of actions did they perform? What were the assets that were actually impacted? And how were the assets actually impacted? So you have to answer in terms of actors, actions, assets, and attributes, right? This kind of framework is ideal for data leakages that we've seen because we have very high level information. If you read any data leakage reports, you will not get information from saying so and so IP did so and so kind of thing or so and so recon was done and this was the kind of information that we get. Uh, Very good to capture basic information in terms of say data breaches happening or say any organizations that are getting attempted to. And using this information, we can just answer four questions which helps us also to identify and take this report to your exec summaries as well. At the end of the day, as a security team, you want to know these four aspects. If these four aspects are good enough for you and they satisfy your demand, then ideally Veris is good and a pretty static way of representing the data as well. But if you as a team require more details, the most details you will get in attack You will get a few details in Lockheed Martin. You will get a very high level information in Diamond. But in Veris, you will get the static information that most of our organizations demand at the moment. So which model to use depends on you and your organization. Which is the best model? I do not know. You will have to see what kind of information that you require. Are all these models static and standard? Yes. Can we map every report to any model? We cannot. There are some reports that can be mapped to a specific model. There are some reports that cannot be mapped to a specific model because it depends on the type of report you're actually reading. If you're reading an exact summary of a report of how a breach happened, you can look at the diamond model, you can look at Veris. If you're looking at a very technical report, you will have to go to Lockheed Martin or Attack. If you want to consume very low level information, you go to Attack. If you want to consume higher level information, you stick to Veris or Diamond. Any questions here?
So at the end, some of the government ask us to report some kind of attack, or so
Mhm.
they will also follow these patterns, this kind of. So let's say GDPR reporting we have to do. They will follow this, or they have their own format.
Yeah, ideally the baseline remains the same. Everybody does some kind of modification on top of that and says that this is like a GDPR one or this is like CS some other customization ones that we talk about. But the baseline remains the same.
Okay.
Again, remember this is to consume CTI. It is not there to share CTI information. So if you are a CTI provider, you will want to write your information in one of the specific ways that you're getting in these four methods. So if I was a CTI provider, it depends whether I want to write a technical report or an exec report. If I write exec reports, I can just share these four information. As a standard, I would need to do that. If I want to write a very technical report, then depends what type of kill chain I want to follow. But most of the reports that you read now, you will see this kind of information being called out. It's not called out explicitly by saying that, okay, this is what it is. But if you can pick up these four things and map it, that is all you need. And generally, these four things will be available.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Uh, from an aspect of looking at the diamond model and the kill chain that we talked about, there are ways of combining this entire methodology as well, right? Where you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all that, these numbers are the 14 phases of, oh sorry, the 14 tactics of the attack framework. The on the left, where you see recon, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, C2, and action on objectives, is actually the phases of the Lockheed Martin kill chain. And every diamond that you see is the diamond model being used to classify the information in the four aspects of infrastructure, adversary, capabilities, and victim. So there is a possibility of very technical reports combining all three frameworks in one that we look at, but this is usually only used by cyber threat intelligence teams or by experts who really need to get into reverse engineering a specific kind of attack. So in general, theoretically, it is possible. There are some reports I will share with you where multiple models have been combined, but because the consumption is extremely low and this is only done in very specific ways or very specific circumstances, that's why it is generally not talked about too much. Oops, sorry. Okay. Good thing is, there are a lot of open source ways of looking at information in terms of frameworks, and some of the companies like Palo Alto also publishes this publicly as well to us. A lot of you must have, I don't know somebody who has used this or not, but there are a lot of playbooks that have been defined in terms of the frameworks that we just spoke about. I'm just going to copy the link and share it with you here. Just give me a second. Yeah. Yep. Can everybody see my screen? Oops.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So what uh, this basically essentially does is it provides you information in terms of your threat actors that you have or the kind of attacks that have happened, right? If you go through any of these names, they will basically be one of the names that you must have read in terms of adversary groups or the ways that people have are publishing information. If you click on any of these adversary groups, over here you will get when they were last updated, right? You can select the kill chain that you want. If you look at the Lockheed Martin kill chain, it will talk about the phases. If you look at the attack framework, it'll give you all the 14 phases that we talk about, right? You can specifically see whichever one you want to see. Do you want information in terms of, say, the recon, weaponization, delivery? Or if you want terms of the tactics that somebody had followed, you can see this information here as well. Now, where is all this information coming up from? Is at the end of the day, it's coming all from, say, the attack framework itself. And with the attack framework itself, there are three things that you need to look at, which is basically the tactics, the techniques, and the groups, right? If you click on the groups, you will see all these groups that are defined here and their specific attack mechanisms also defined. So for example, if there is, say, a specific group that you're talking about, people who have worked here will basically tell you what all techniques has this specific group used. If you want to see them in the attack framework way, you can just go to the attack navigator here as well. And you will basically be able to see in what way have they actually done what. Whatever information you see over here, which says something like T1211 or 12, whatever, right? This information is nothing but tactics and techniques which you're seeing, right? There are So these are the 14 tactics that you see, and these are the techniques that you will see under them which exist. So for every technique, there is a code. For example, if somebody under recon was doing active scanning using vulnerability scanning, that would be T1595.002. Now, like I said, tactics can change. Techniques can change. Tactics don't change very frequently. Do you need to memorize this? No. Do you need to use this? Yes, very often you can. How will you use this information is in terms of a group providing information in terms of their techniques, or sorry, their tactics, and then their techniques that we're using. Is this part clear?
Yes, sir. So this data is actually coming from MITRE only, right? Which we are
Yes.
seeing here on Unit 42.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Nobody asked me where they're getting this information from.
I had a question related to the lysis, alias of uh, these groups, like from where they get it, how they gather it.
Yeah. So there is a standard process again followed for this. So generally, we spoke about something called as sticks and taxi feeds last time, right?
Yes.
Uh, what sticks and taxi feeds actually do is that they provide us all these technical information in terms of tactics and procedures that you get. But if you're saying that, how do you get information in terms of what a group is doing? How do they get information in terms of mapping it to tactics and techniques? Is some analyst who's sitting here and actually doing it. Secondly, this information also comes in from a lot of open source methodologies that people get, and they basically combine it and give it to you. So this data, where is it coming from? Is basically coming in from a lot of say companies. It's coming in from a lot of people who are sharing data with them. It is coming in from a lot of say people who are getting this information for them and sending it out. And all those data sources that you also want to look at, it's why not this data source, but show it to you. Yeah, in terms of looking at how attack is actually filled up, people provide them sub techniques and techniques, people provide them which OSs, people provide them threat intelligence, people provide them data sources, and people provide them use cases as well. So this is how information is basically set up and sent out. How this information is basically populated is something that MISP as a solution does, which I spoke about last time. So people who are using MISP as in their organizations, it helps them uh, map information out and share it in this format that we spoke about. This format is then thereby picked up, populated, and shared with the community worldwide. So where is this information come up from? It is some researcher, somebody sitting in some organization helping the open source community out. We do it ourselves. We document every attack, etc. as well and share it. But again, very few people do it, and this is generally uh, more from feeds that they take from, say, all your companies or vendors that you use. So major source of contribution is your third party vendors, which basically extract this information and keep it with themselves or have their own data lakes. And then uh, for the open source community, they give it out. Otherwise, they're selling it out to people or to companies as well. Any question? Okay, there are a couple of other tools as well that are used, and there are a couple of more incident response cycles like the SANS ones, like F3 EAD as well. There are multiple tools that people use almost doing similar kind of things, but we will pick up the two most popular ones and we will look at them as well. But any questions in terms of any of the frameworks, these are fairly important to do. So anything that you guys have any questions on? Okay. Like I said, I spoke about sticks and taxi frameworks, right? What sticks and taxi frameworks actually provide information is in terms of a lot of TTPs, in terms of tools, network host artifacts, domain names, IP addresses, and hash values. Now, in over here, there is a concept which Bianco's pyramid of pain basically comes up, and what it says is that hash values, IP addresses, domain names, and network host artifacts are easy to gather, but they don't have very long-term retention in terms of they change very frequently, right? In terms of tools and in terms of TTPs that you have, although they exist, but they will not change very frequently, but they are very hard to analyze or gather the information with, because there is a lot of analysis that is actually required to gather this information in the first place. A lot of you who are using thread feeds stay to the first four aspects of it, and I'm sure that you would have faced certain issues as well, where say an IP address which was being marked as malicious is actually belonging to a genuine customer, or say hash value that you've got is actually fine and this was existing in some store for a very long time. Similarly, domain names which today are malicious, tomorrow are clean, then again they're malicious, and then they're clean, right? So all this information that we're looking at, there is a lot of information, but it changes very frequently. The way we can use it changes very frequently. Any questions on this?
No. No.
Okay. All right. Uh, so folks, just take a 15-minute break and we'll come back and speak about a couple of issues that we have detected in these models. Uh, just as a question, how many of you have VMs on your laptops or can operate a VM on your laptop? Or rather, who cannot?
So I have set up this VM. It just logs me in with MISP and password. I have to know how do I do a port forwarding, because I try to use the IP to connect to the browser. It is not available.
All right, it's okay. Any of you who doesn't have a VM on your machine or cannot do it because of restrictions for corporate laptops, etc. Folks, anybody?
I think then everybody have it.
All right, okay, cool. We'll figure it out then. Cool. Just take a 15-minute break. We'll come back and then we'll discuss some other concepts because post lunch I wanted to do a lab kind of thing with all of you to look at some solutions like TRAM and MISPIN, etc. to show you different aspects of it. But we'll see what we can do and what we can't do. If you guys don't have it, then probably I'll provide some machines to you guys. Let's see.
So actually, you have given that link to download, right? The VM. I downloaded it, but it's not working.
That's okay. We'll figure a way out of doing that. So
Sure.
let me see how we
Okay.
can go ahead with it. Right, folks. I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Sure.
Just take a break. Just walk around a little bit and we'll catch up soon.
Okay. 11:30. Oh, 11:35.
Yeah, 11:35.
Okay.
Thanks.